And we are live. G'day everyone, Mike Jeffrey here, and you are listening to My Creative Journey, episode number 22. To all you new listeners out there, hello, and thank you so much for taking the time to stop by here today. As I said, my name is Mike, and I'm a wedding photographer from Sydney, Australia. Each week on the show, I bring you guys along on the highs and lows of my own creative journey, and share all the knowledge that I've gained along the road to building my own freelance business. In this week's episode, I want to talk all about pricing and knowing what to charge for your work. This is something that I go back and forth on all the time, so I thought that I'd make an episode about it today because I figure that if I'm struggling with it, then you guys probably are as well. I've come up with a few handy questions to ask yourself before you set a price on your next product or service that will really save you a lot of time and money later on down the track. But before I get into that, let's just talk about how cold it has been in Sydney here this past week. For reference, I'm recording this on Thursday the 10th of June, and today it got to a top of 10 degrees, which is very unlike Sydney, and I don't know where I've actually moved to it. I feel a bit strange complaining about that it's only got to a top of 10 degrees because I'm sure that is a lot warmer than most other places in the country at the moment, but it just feels a bit strange to be inside and actually have the heater on. We haven't had the heater on all year, so to have it on today of all days, I feel very strange about that. And it has been freezing cold outside. It's been very hard to get motivated to go for a run or to actually leave the house full stop. So that has been very tough. So I hope that it warms up soon, but I don't have my hopes set on that. And I know, scorn me if you will, but I am recording this episode on a Thursday. I said last week I was recording last week's episode on a Wednesday, this week's episode on a Thursday. We don't know where we're going to go next week. Could be a Friday, but hopefully I will get back on track. I've just been so busy over this past week. I've actually had quite a lot of admin tasks that I need to do, like a lot of little small things, and they just seem to start to catch up on me. And then last Friday, my laptop decided to die on me, all out of the blue. It came up with an error message when I turned it on last Friday morning that said the battery in my laptop had just stopped holding charge whatsoever. So it would still work, thankfully. It still worked when it was plugged in, but it just didn't work to the full capacity that I needed it to last week. So I had to order in a new battery. And if you did see on Instagram, I recorded how I changed the battery in my laptop. That's never something that I've done before, but I thought it would be a lot cheaper than going and buying a new laptop. And so far, so good. The new laptop battery has been working really well, and the laptop is back at full capacity. Over the past year, I haven't really been able to use my laptop as a laptop. It's been slowly on its way out now for probably a year, 18 months or so. I could only use it off charger for about maybe an hour, and then it would need charging again because the battery just couldn't hold a charge. But now with the new battery, I've had it off charge basically all day today, which has been really nice. So I can actually go back to using my laptop as a laptop, which does open me up to a lot more things of being able to work on the road and work freely. But it just happened that it decided to die on me last Friday, right when I was in the middle of quite a lot of work. I was in the middle of sending off the engagement photos that I shot a couple of weeks ago. It took me quite a bit of time to turn those around, actually, because I had a lot of other photos and I had that corporate shoot that I told you guys about. So I was super busy turning those around, and I was really trying to perfect the photos. It's something that I can tend to go back and forth on a lot of the photos and the way they look. I don't tend to love editing for that reason, because I can be a perfectionist and I can sit there for a lot longer and go back on it. It's one of those things when you go out and take the photos, you can't really go back and retake them. You sort of get the photos, you're in the swing and you're taking photos and you're just hoping that when you get back later on that they'll be fine. When you open them up, more often than not, the photos are fine. But for me, I just always think they could be better. I always think there's something else I could do to them. So I spend hours on trying to fix them up. And I got to the end of last week's photos. I was editing those engagement photos and I thought, they just don't look right. All of them just needed a little bit of a tweak. Just something just wasn't there. And so I went back and re-edited all the photos again. So that's why it took me a little bit longer, but I did send them off last Friday. And that may have had something to do with why my computer crashed, because I was using Lightroom and Photoshop very heavily last week. So that would have been taking up a lot of power on my computer. But I got there and we got them sent off last Friday. So that was really nice to get those out of the way. Also, over the last week, I've had meetings with 2 potential clients who are looking at hiring me as their wedding photographer. So that has been really nice, and it's really enjoyable, I think, to go out and meet new people. I really appreciate when people actually would like to catch up. It's a lot of emails back and forth, so to be able to get out and actually talk to someone in person, I think, is a really nice way to interact and be able to see whether you are compatible with that sort of person, whether you have the same idea in mind of what you want for the wedding day, and also to hear a bit from them about their story, because I think there's only so much you can learn off an email about their personality and about what they're really after. So that was really nice to actually go and catch up with some people and see what they're all about. It's been really successful for me, I've found, because I really enjoy actually going and meeting in person. I know a lot of people like to just have a phone call or have a Zoom call or things like that and have a sort of your meeting online. But I would much rather go and meet in person if able to be done, obviously. Obviously, these people were within the Sydney area, so I was able to meet them a lot closer to home. But if they were outside of that, it probably would be out of the scope of something that I would consider having to do, because it does take a lot of time out of my day. But I don't mind actually going out and meeting people, despite the fact that it does take hours out of my day and actually having to go and meet them or meet them on the weekends or meet them outside of the work hours that I normally work in. I don't mind that, because at the end of the day, I think it builds a lot more of a relationship, and I really get to know what it is that they are wanting from me and what it is that I can provide for them. And I can really communicate that well when we're there in person as opposed to over the phone. I always just think that there's something about that sort of in-person meeting that you just can never get over Zoom, and I'm really glad for the fact that we have had Zoom over the past year and had other video communicational methods. But to be able to meet in person when possible, I will always try to do, and I think clients really appreciate that as well, especially being able to go to them. I would always try to do that, and I want to be able to free myself up in my other work, as I said a couple of weeks ago, trying to free up some of my other time with things that I don't particularly love trying to do. I'd love to free that up to actually take the time to go and meet these people. So having that and freeing myself is just something that I really enjoy doing, especially as someone who sits here at a computer by themselves most of the days of the week. Being able to go out and meet clients and talk to people, especially when you're in that sort of off season where you're not taking as many photos anymore, being able to meet new people and talk to them about the whole process, I think is really nice. And hopefully from these meetings, I will get a couple more clients out of them, and they'll be booked up into next year. Speaking of clients, I've actually been setting up a CRM or client management system over this past week, which is not something that I've had before, which, if you don't know what it is, it's sort of more like an online client sort of database where I can keep track of all the different clients and all the different inquiries that I've had, and sort of be able to send emails and send my sort of pricing templates and stuff through that directly. So it's a lot of sort of rinse and repeat things for when I do get a new inquiry, so we're not using a lot of time. And this is not something that I've had before in the past. I've normally responded to each email individually. Obviously, the emails are basically exactly the same anyway. When I get a new inquiry, all the stuff, all the information that they were asking for is there. But I think this just allows me to have it all in one place. And this really allows me to see where I'm working through with different clients, especially having different clients on different timelines. Working in sort of a service industry where clients are actually booking me in 18 months in advance, you've got to know where they're up to. You have to have a good way of actually keeping tabs on what you've actually told certain people and what prices you've actually quoted certain people and what they're after. If people are wanting me to photograph their wedding at the end of next year, but we're trying to sort out an engagement shoot towards the end of this year, I've got to know that that's in the timeline somewhere. I've got to be able to send out information for that. I've got to send out all sorts of questionnaires for their actual wedding day. We've got to sort out having a meeting for that. Things get harder when they're so far in advance. If I got an email and someone said they wanted work next weekend, that'd be fine, because I'd know everything I've got to do and it just has to be done right now because we got to do it ASAP. When people are trying to book me for next year, there's not really much I can do in this point, especially for them, because they haven't even organised anything on their wedding day yet. So asking them questions about their wedding day really doesn't make sense, because they don't actually know anything about the wedding day much yet anyway. So I really hold back on that sort of stuff and hold back asking the questions and actually having the meetings until they have that stuff in place. So this is just sort of a reminder for me to know when and where we're up to with that sort of stuff. But it also helps when I'm getting new inquiries as well, because recently it's been a lot of back and forth with new inquiries, because for me, I spend a lot of time actually typing out emails because I retype the same thing every time. I don't know why, don't ask me, but this I think will help me just to have an actual template that I can insert and be able to put in an email to outline all my pricing and outline everything that I'm about, because that is the main information that goes into every single email. It's just me just changing the words at the moment, depending on the mood I'm in and depending on how I write the particular email. So at least this will be something a bit more coherent that will go out to a lot of different people. And it also helps because in some circumstances I can automate different types of emails. Like if I wanted to automate an invoice to be sent out to someone on a particular day, or I wanted to automate to send someone a particular type of questionnaire, say 6 months before their wedding day, it could automatically do that. And I don't need to remember that that's something that needs to be done. I've been really wanting to set this up for a while, but over the past week, I spoke to you guys last week about how I'm heading away next Friday. So I'm actually leaving for 3 weeks going on a holiday. So I wanted to have something in place that would be easy for me to access while I'm away and be able to respond to emails without being there answering emails for hours each day or answering different questions for people. I can just have them somewhere to direct them to with all my prices and that sort of stuff. So being able to have that set up was a real priority for me before we go away, and something that I think will help down the track as I start to get more clients. It's hard to maintain being on top of them. It was actually quite funny when I went out to the meeting the other day. I had a meeting on Sunday afternoon, then I had a meeting on Tuesday afternoon, and I was getting confused who was who, because the back and forth with the emails it can get very confusing, especially when you haven't put a face to the name yet. You're just talking to someone with just their first name over email, and you sort of don't know who is who. So when you actually meet the person, of course, then you can start to differentiate the different stories of the two people. But these two people, actually, the two that I met were actually getting married both in January next year. So both, one was the weekend after the other. So it was becoming very confusing because I can normally remember who I'm talking about depending on when they're getting married or where they're getting married, but they're both getting married in Sydney next January, a week apart, and they both inquired with me basically at the same time, which was very strange. But having this sort of system where I can sort of monitor where I'm up to with different people will really help in that instance where I'm getting all these emails back and forth and I forget where I've scheduled things or forget what sort of meetings I've set up with people, where they are and what times and things like that. So having this in place, I think, is really going to help going forward, but especially when I'm away or away from the desk over the weekend, even in particular, when I'm not responding to emails, but someone just wants to know what my prices are. I can have something automated that so when someone asks me what are my prices, I can just send that to them straight away and they don't have to wait for me to get back to them over the weekend, which I think can be a bit of a hold up and can annoy some people and turn people away. Especially, I know, as being someone who's trying to organize my own wedding photographer at the moment, I know that if someone is very delayed to respond to me, I'm already probably going to move on to the next person. I'm probably going to go with the person who's the fastest to respond to me, especially if I start to get a good vibe off that person. I'm probably not going to go with someone else then after I've made my mind up. So trying to get in there first and trying to make sure that all that stuff is in place and that I'm able to get started on the right foot, I think, is super important. So this will really go a long way for me. And talking about my prices, I've really been trying to update those and make them more accessible over the past week. I've always been someone who's had my prices easily accessible on my website. I have them there on a page on my website, and not a lot of photographers actually do advertise their prices straight on their website. They will normally put a price range, but they won't sort of put their exact prices. I've always been someone that likes to put that out because, one, I think it's a strong draw card for a lot of people, especially when I'm new to the industry. It advertises that I'm new and that's why I'm not charging as much. And so people can see that is why. And so it is a draw card for a lot of people. But also I just think it's sort of a courtesy thing, in that I don't want to have 1,000 emails from people just asking me what my prices are. I don't want to have to deal with all that. I know some people who will, and some people who are happy to sit there and sort through those. But for me, it's an annoyance for not just me, but for the client as well. I know if I go to someone's website and I'm trying to find something and their prices isn't advertised, more often than not, I'm not going to email them because I'll just move on to the next person and see if they've got prices. So that is a starting point. But then if I'm having to email them and having to get back and just getting automated responses from them, it's not really sort of personal. So I like having it there on my website. But there are a lot of things that I don't have on my website. There are a lot of other things that do go along with my services that I haven't had there. And that is something that I normally give clients after they inquire with me. So I've been trying to set all those up in the back end to try and have those sort of automated. And sort of over the past week, I've been coming across my prices a lot more and sort of thinking about different things and different add-ons that I haven't put much thought into before, because not having actually shot many weddings before, I don't know what particular add-ons people are actually after. So having that experience and sort of going through that now and trying to reevaluate what sort of prices and what I can charge for particular things. And so that's where I really came up with the idea for this episode. And it's been one I've been wanting to make for a while, to be honest, but I didn't know what I was going to really talk about until this week. So I thought that I would come across a whole episode of talking about how to price your work and how to sort of price any type of service or any type of product that you're trying to sell somewhere, and knowing what to charge for it. Because for me, when I first started in business, that was one of the hardest things, is trying to know where to price a product or service. I think it's definitely easier with particular types of products because the price sort of is either an industry standard or it's based on how much the actual product actually costs. So you want to just have a sort of percentage markup on that. But when it comes to a service, you don't really know what to charge, because for me, when I go out and take photos, there's no real cost associated with that. So having to charge a price for that can seem sometimes daunting, and sometimes trying to put an hourly rate on yourself seems a bit weird and seems not like something I really want to do when I'm starting work to actually go and tell someone this is how much I'm worth an hour. But that is something you need to do, and it is something you need to actually have in mind on your end, especially trying to set prices. And especially if you're trying to sell different types of packages with different types of services involved, like you would never go to someone and say, here's my hourly rate for everything flat. You've got to break that up into depending on different services and things like that. So that has always been something that was hard for me at the start. So I thought that why not make an episode about that today? And for those interested, some of the products that I'm talking about here are like photo prints or photo books or sort of wall art that I do actually sell on the back end. It's not something that I particularly advertise on the website because it's not the service that I provide, but it sort of goes along with the service after the fact. And a lot of people would like to know those prices up front. So I've been trying to work on sort of having a sort of guide for those and something that I can just easily send out to people, because normally I don't really think about that until after the work's been done. So it's been good to sort of come back across that this past week and get that in the front of mind and see where I can price those things. But in that process, I've sort of come up with this list of sort of questions that I'm trying to ask myself of how to price different things, and things that I think I should ask myself before I get to that point in order to be able to come up with an appropriate price for different types of products and services. So the first one I think is the most obvious that I could have ever come across, is to evaluate what the cost of that product or service is. Now, this is obviously easier, as I said, when it comes to a particular type of product. You can obviously charge how much you have to spend on that particular type of product. So if I'm trying to order a photo album for a particular client, I could charge exactly what it's going to cost me to have that produced, but then I'm not actually making any money from that. So I've obviously got to charge more than what it's costing me, otherwise I'm not making any money. I mean, in the start, if you want to charge less, you can. If you want to make it more appealing so you've got more, I'm all for that if you're not having any work. But I think in this particular instance, for me, when it comes to a product, I'm happy to charge more. The other thing to include in that is not just the cost of the actual product. You've got to include the operating costs associated with you and your business. For example, when I was selling my calendars at the end of last year, I set that up on my website and I was selling my calendars. I was happy to sort of run a fairly even sort of cost of those. I didn't really want to make any money from them. That really wasn't the aim. I didn't want to inflate the price too much. And I was already paying a lot of money to actually have them produced. So I couldn't really charge a lot because I knew I wouldn't get many sales. But one thing I didn't factor in was how much it cost me to actually host them on my website, how much it host the actual sale on my website. So to actually have the products advertised there and be able to be purchased straight through my website, I actually had to pay more to the website service to be able to have those hosted. I then had to pay a commission to people like PayPal for when people were actually paying online. They take about a 3% cut. So not factoring in those things would be detrimental to how much I was actually selling them for, especially when you're not selling a product much above what you actually pay for the price of the product. So those are things that you've got to take into account when you're actually selling the product. Also take into account how much it's going to take to actually ship the product. If you're not factoring that in, and depending on where people are actually going to ship from, are you going to charge them extra for shipping, or are you just going to have a flat rate for everyone? So depending if someone lives closer to you, it's not going to cost you as much, but you're going to charge them more. Or if people live a long way away, you're going to charge them under what it's going to cost you, but it'll even out in the long run. So you've got to have that sort of in mind as well. Are you going to charge that in advance, or are you going to charge that on top of the price of your product? In the end, though, you just got to make sure that you're not running at a loss, because there are going to be other things that do come up, and there's going to be something that goes wrong. For instance, when I did my calendars last year, I actually sent quite a few of them off and then realized there was an issue with all of them that I sent out. So I had to reorder them. They didn't charge me anything more to reorder all the calendars, but I'd already sent them. So I paid the shipping costs to send them all. And there was actually a few that actually did go out. There's a few that went overseas. So I actually had to pay a lot of money to have those sent, and then I resent them. So I had to pay the shipping costs again, but didn't charge the client again. So I actually lost money on all those sales because I didn't factor in enough to actually cover all that. So you've got to just make sure that there's enough in there to, if something did go wrong, and if something went wrong on your end or the production end, that you've got enough in there to cover that. But it depends as well how much you're wanting to charge, and are you wanting to make a lot of money from this? If you're happy to run it pretty even, then that is okay as well. And then when it comes to a service, as I said, there's probably not many operating costs that do go into it, but you got to look at your other costs. So your website costs, the cost of your actual equipment. So when I'm taking photos, I know that my equipment is going to depreciate in value over a certain amount of time, and so I'm going to have to buy new equipment in a few years' time. So I've got to work out how many photo shoots I'm planning on doing over the next couple of years and sort of value in the cost of all that equipment and how much it's going to depreciate over that time, and sort of give myself enough allowance to repurchase equipment in a couple of years' time, because I know that things can break and things will break and things will go wrong. So I've got to give myself enough money and charge enough so that that is adequately accounted for. And then other things not to forget are things like insurance, like things that you may need to actually start your business, things that you have to have on a month-to-month basis to start your business. Other operating costs, if you have an office, if you have an actual space that you're renting, these are costs that you have to factor into how much you're going to charge for your service. And so the second thing to do is actually look at what other people are doing. And I think in a service industry, this is probably the best way to go about it, because you're in direct competition with everyone else who is working in your industry. So actually having a good understanding of what they charge can then help you to know what you should charge and know where you sit in that sort of playing field. For me, I'm trying to compete in this industry, and I'm fairly new in the industry, so I'm charging a bit below what the industry standard is at the moment, and I'm happy with that. And I know that I'm priced quite below what the industry standard is, because I'm trying to actually start in this industry, and I don't have a lot of work to show for it, and I don't have a lot of reputation and things like that in this industry. So I'm trying to use the fact that I'm charging less. Obviously, I'm then advertising that the fact that I'm charging less is because I'm only new in this industry. I think your pricing can go one of two ways. If you're not charging enough, people can tend to think that that is because your work isn't to as good a quality as someone else next door who's charging more. And then that may not be the case. That may just be the fact that you're happy to charge less and they really wanted to charge more, even though they're not actually putting the effort and time into the work that you are. They're just charging more because all it is to them is a job. Whereas to you, you're happy to go out and shoot photos, so you're not going to charge as much. So knowing that, you may not actually get as much work charging a lower price because people don't think your service is as good a quality. So make sure that you're staying around what the industry standard is, because a big outlier in that sort of regard can stand you out as not being as good as the person next door. In that same token though, if you're going to charge way more than the industry standard, people may think that you're an expert somehow, even if your work isn't as good. This can go two ways. This can have, you may not have anyone book you at all. If I was going to charge $15,000 to go shoot a wedding tomorrow, I may not have any inquiries, but then I may get one. And that one might be from someone who thinks that I'm of a superior standard because they're happy to pay $100,000 for their wedding. So they're, of course, going to hire a $15,000 wedding photographer. In that example, it can work, but you have to be okay to try. You have to have the amount of money behind you to support yourself for quite a while until that one inquiry comes in and you can say that, oh, it's okay. I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make is charging for their work and then equating themselves with that price. If you're not getting booked at the price you have set for yourself, then you're not worth that much money. I don't care how much you tell yourself you're worth that much money. If no one's actually booking you for that price, you're not worth that price. So you've got to sort of reevaluate yourself. If you charge $15,000 and actually someone comes along and books you for $15,000, all of a sudden you are worth $15,000 because someone has booked you. So if there is one person that's booked you, there are probably many people out there who would book you. It's just about making sure you get your work in front of the right people. I don't care what industry you're in. If you want to charge way above the industry standard, if someone's happy to book you, then that's how much you charge, and you can continue to charge that, because if one person's happy to book you, there are probably others out there as well. So if you're not getting booked at your current price, maybe you've got to look at yourself and say, maybe I need to drop it back. Maybe I'm not worth the amount of money that I've come to and that I think that I'm worth. Far too many people start out in business and just have a price tag on themselves and are never happy to go up or down on that, never happy to decrease the price to get work, because they've come to the fact that they're worth a certain amount of money. If an artist says that their work is worth X amount of money, then that's great. But if no one's actually going to pay for that work, then you're not worth that money. So you've got to be willing to come down. You've got to be willing to get to a point where there's sort of that equilibrium between you're not getting so many inquiries that you aren't able to fulfill them all versus you're not getting any because you're charging too much. So making sure that you're in that sort of sweet spot and you're happy with the price that you're charging, and other people are happy to book you at the price you're charging as well. It's all about knowing your market and knowing who your potential client is, who your target demographic is. If you're working in an industry where you're targeting higher end clients, then of course you can charge more. If I'm looking to target uni students, then it charging an exuberant amount of money probably isn't going to actually land me those clients. If that's who I want to work for, charging a large amount of money is not going to land me those clients. So I've got to reevaluate. Versus working for people who are getting married into their early 30s, into their late 30s, who have been saving up for this their whole life, I can probably charge more. If that's my target demographic, if that's who I love to work for, then I can probably charge a bit more and afford to charge at a premium service. The other way you can look at that is to really set yourself a plan or set yourself a target of how much you want to be working per year. If I'm working in a service industry, how often do I want to be working? How often do I want to be working a year, per month, per week? How often do I want to be actually out there working? And I can sort of work backwards on how much I need to charge to be able to make it sustainable for me, to be able to make enough money to be actually able to make a living out of this. I think too many people forget that they're trying to make a living and that we're not just trying to support ourselves and support us in a business. This is meant to support your whole life as well. So just making enough money to be able to cover all your costs in your business is great, but you've got to be able to support yourself in your own life as well. You've got to be able to pay your own rent, pay your own mortgage, pay your own groceries, and pay all the other things that come along with your life as well. So being able to keep that in mind and having a target based on how much money you know you need to earn, and then being able to come to yourself and say, how often would I like to work? If I would like to just shoot 20 weddings per year, that's great, but then I've also got to probably put my prices up a little bit more to be able to equate for that, to be able to say, well, how much do I need to charge per wedding to earn enough money for the whole year if I'm happy just to shoot one every 3 weeks like that? Versus someone who's working 2 to 3 times a week probably doesn't need to charge as more, but in turn they're actually working more. So you really have to get that equilibrium in place and knowing how often you need to work and knowing how often you need to be able to sell your work as well, especially if you're working with different types of products, knowing how many you need to sell per week and how many you're aiming and how strong your advertising is and how many people you're trying to get it in front of. And if you know on average what your return is per week, then you can sort of sit back and say, well, here's how much I need to be charging for that type of work. I've tried to sell photos and prints of my photos before, and it's sort of gotten me in that trap of sort of knowing how often I need to be able to sell my work. If I'm going to sell an artwork for say $200, how much am I going to make from that artwork? If I'm going to make a 50% of that artwork in profit, then knowing if that's $100, do I need to sell one of those per week to make any money? Am I going to have to sell 3 or 4 of those a week to be able to make any money? So knowing what to price and then thinking, will someone pay that much? And will I get as many sales as I need to? Or does that mean I need to step up my advertising and put more into advertising, in which case I need to charge more, So really working out those sorts of things, and that has been something that I've always been hard on and trying to come at. I think it's easier in a service industry because I can sort of target who I want to be working with and how often I want to be working and put the prices appropriately. If you're working on smaller margins, working with products, then it's going to be a lot harder and you need to be able to sell a lot of product to be able to sustain yourself within that. But if you've got a target that you want to reach, if this is not something that you're trying to do full time, if this is a part-time gig for you and you're just trying to make a bit extra money on the side, if you've got a target you want to reach, then that can really help you to know how much to charge and know whether you can charge above the market or even a little bit below to try and sell more of your product. And I think that's a good place to go into the next point, which is it a primary or secondary service? So for me, with all my print sales at the moment, most of them are secondary services. So they will come off the back of service that I've done in actually taking photos for people. So I will get print sales off the back of those from them ordering them off me after the fact. So that's not something that I'm directly advertising, and I don't need to put the prices up because I've already charged them what I know I need. And anything extra on that is just that. It's just extra money on the side. So I don't need to particularly charge a lot more money for print sales. Of course I do, because it's not something that is overtly easy, and it obviously is something that I have to do, so it's worth something, but I'm not charging as much for a print sale of someone who I went and did a photography shoot with, as opposed to if I go out and do actual landscape photography. If I'm going to sell a print of landscape photography, that's a primary service for landscape photos. There's nowhere else that people are actually acquiring that work from me. I'm not getting paid to go out and take the photos. So the only way I can earn money from them is to sell prints from those. So chances are those are going to cost a lot more for the same product, for the same sort of, if I was doing a framed image of a landscape photo versus a framed image of someone on their wedding day, the landscape photo is going to be worth a lot more because that's an artwork piece where that is the only way that I can earn any money from that. As opposed to taking a photo of someone's wedding day, I've already charged them to take the photo. So charging them an exuberant amount to actually have it printed really doesn't make a lot of sense. That's not where I'm trying to earn my main amount of money. Yes, I can make a little bit more money from that, but charging them heaps more money is really going against my brand, and it's really going to turn people the wrong way when they have to pay $3,000 to have a photo of themselves printed out that they've already paid you for to have you there on the day to actually take the photo. So I don't want to be that person, and I don't think anyone else wants to be either. So knowing whether it's a primary or secondary sale can really help you to know what your pricing should be. And yeah, that's really not to say that you can't charge anything or you can't earn money off any secondary sales. Of course, if you're going to go back into a repeat client again, if I'm going to go back to a repeat client, someone I've already worked with, that probably is some sort of a secondary sale. I've already worked with them before. If I re-advertise to them about a service in another area, for example, if I've shot someone's wedding and then a couple of years later they've had a family and they come back to me and they say they want some family photos, I can still charge for that and I can still make money off that, even though it is a secondary sale from that person. But I can still offer them a discount because I've worked with them before. I'm happy to work a bit with the price there because that is a secondary service. But I can still make a lot of money off that because that is something that I really am still trying to do and something that is a primary service for someone else. And I guess that really comes down to the next question is how much do you particularly enjoy that task? Because if it's not something that you overly enjoy and it is a bit of a secondary service, you can probably charge a bit more for it. You know, even if it's a primary service and you're not sure if you really should offer it as a service, you're not sure if it's a product you should offer, maybe charge a bit more for it and see if anyone is actually happy to actually pay for it, because maybe it is worth your time. Maybe you're not sure whether you should offer something because it is quite a bit of a hassle, and for you, you're not really sure whether you want to actually include that as a service that you do provide. But if someone is happy to actually pay you for that work at a higher price, maybe it is worth your time. Maybe it is worth the time that you're thinking. I'd go out and take photos of couples for free every weekend. It really wouldn't annoy me at all. But having to edit all those photos does take time, and that's not something that I really enjoy. So, of course, I'm going to have to charge them a bit of money for the time that I spend there and the time that I have to be there taking photos and have to go back and forth with them and editing and all the other costs associated. Another good example would be, say, designing an album. I don't particularly love designing an album, and I find it quite tedious to go and have to go back and forth with a client designing an album. So that is something that does take a lot of time. It's quite tedious for me, so I am going to charge a bit more for that service based on the fact that it's harder for me to do. It's harder for everyone involved. It takes a lot of time for me, so I need to charge for that amount of time that I'm going back and forth with the client. But also, it's not something that I have to offer. I don't have to offer albums if I don't want to. I don't have to offer any add-on services if I don't want to. I can just give all my photos directly to the clients. But if that is something that clients are after, if they do want albums, then I can offer them. But it doesn't mean that I'm not allowed to make any money off them. That doesn't mean that the time that I spend on them can't be charged for, because I've already charged them for a service that I provided earlier on. Because the way I see it is that is an extra service that I'm providing for them to actually go and design that album, and that was not something that was in the original contract. So if they are after an album, they can come to me and I'll charge them appropriately for that, because that is not something that I love to do. I spoke about this last week in doing work that you don't particularly enjoy. When it comes to me actually going out and doing sort of corporate work or headshots and that sort of stuff, I don't particularly enjoy that sort of work. That's not work that I really want to work in. So gradually I continue to put my prices up for that sort of stuff and see where it gets to a point where people aren't happy to book me. And if it ever gets to that point, well, that's great. But at least I'm charging as much as I know I possibly can. And I'm happy to bump my prices up there, because if I never get another inquiry for that, that doesn't really bother me at all. You know what I mean? So charging a price that you would be happy to pay, or you'd be happy to pay yourself for this particular service. I'd love to get paid more to do something that I don't enjoy, and I would expect that of anyone who I was working for. If I'm trying to do a job that I don't particularly enjoy, I'd be hoping to get paid more for that, because it's not something that I enjoy doing. Whereas most of the work I do on a day-to-day, I'd be happy to do for free. So being able to charge an appropriate price for something that you would potentially do for free is sometimes hard, and it's sometimes hard to put a price on how much your time is worth per hour. I think is tough, but then in the return, you've got to be able to put a more appropriate price on the things that you don't enjoy doing, and sort of make sure you're charging appropriately for that. Sometimes you just have to be willing to take a risk, and if it's not work you particularly enjoy, maybe someone will actually pay a price higher than you think you are worth for that service. And if that's the case, well, you've just earned yourself a bit more money for work that you didn't really want to do anyway. And if not, well, it's not work you wanted to do anyway, so you haven't really missed out on anything. So why not just have a shot at those type of things and actually put prices up and see if you can earn a bit more money there to actually offset some of the other money that you've probably lost in other areas. In the end, I would say the biggest thing is to make sure that you are charging a reasonable amount to actually earn a profit, to make sure that you are making your business sustainable, or as sustainable as you possibly can. I know in the beginning it's going to be very tough to make it sustainable, but you want it to be with actual growth to become sustainable. You don't want to be someone who has to change their prices every other week. And I think I get to that point where I think, oh, maybe I should put my prices up this week. But being in an industry where people are trying to book me a long way in advance, I can't be changing my prices every other week, because if then someone looks back and thinks, oh, he's now changed his prices again, he's now done this, and I booked him in for the same time as that person did, and they've got a half price discount. Why is that the case? So you've got to maintain a fair consistency, especially when you're working with sort of products as well. You can't all of a sudden increase the prices of all your products and say everyone who purchased them last week all of a sudden had them at half price of someone who's purchasing one this week. So this is something that you've really got to ask yourself early on, and you've really got to get this down pat, because you can't change this a lot through the go. So make sure that it's able to scale, and make sure that you have a plan in place based on how many you think you need to sell or how many services you need to provide per year to know that you can actually maintain yourself on this. Even though you may not be at that number yet, if I'm only shooting 3 weddings a year, I'm not going to charge $30,000 for each of those weddings. But I want to get to a point where I can shoot between 20 and 30, so I can charge about $3,000. So when I do grow, that will be sustainable for me later on down the track. At the moment, it may not be, and I'm under no illusion that anyone would actually pay me $30,000 per wedding, and I'm not going to scale back as I increase my inquiries, but getting to a point where it is sustainable longer term, and not just continually increasing your prices as you go, because that will upset a lot of different people. I'd say the other big takeaway from this episode would be that if no one's actually paying you for the work you're trying to do, if no one's paying the price that you've set for the work you're trying to do, then maybe you've got to decrease your prices. You may think you're worth a particular amount, and that's great, but if no one's paying you at that price, then you're not worth that amount. And it doesn't matter how long you want to continue with that sort of game, you inevitably need to be able to make money to survive with your own life. So if that means decreasing your prices and upping the standard of your service, even though your service may be worth more, you are still not getting any inquiries. So something is going wrong there. Maybe it's an educational thing. Maybe you need to educate people on why you're worth so much. Maybe you need to show people why it is you're worth more than the person next door. But in the end, if no one's paying that price for your service, maybe you've got to start to think about, maybe I can decrease my prices a little bit and see how we go, and then maybe pick them back up later on when people can see that I'm at some sort of standard to charge that sort of price. I've worked for free before, and I'll continue to work at pretty below industry standard prices until I can get my actual foot in the door, until I can get some sort of reputation built around me and my business. So I'm happy to continue to build with that and build over time. And I don't think that my prices aren't ever going to change. They're going to change on the yearly, but I can't change them every other week. So I'm content with that, and I'm content with where I am now, and I'm hoping to build into next year, and we're staying on that trajectory. If I continue to book clients as the way I am, that's going to be okay. And I would just tell anyone else who is trying to start in that, make sure that you're pricing your work appropriately, because that is one of the biggest things. No matter how good you are, if your work's not priced to where you're at or where people perceive you to be at, then you're never going to book any work. And it doesn't in the end matter how good you are if you're not booking any work. And so that is where I'm going to leave today's episode, guys. I really hope you did enjoy this one. It was a bit of an interesting one for me to record. I've never really recorded much about my pricing before, but the episodes that I do talk about prices or my different sort of financials seem to do a lot better, and I get a lot of messages from people saying how helpful they are. So it's really why I wanted to record this one today, but it was also something that I had come across in my own work over the past week. So I thought it was something very relevant to speak about this week, and I do hope that you guys were able to get a lot out of this. And I think that's where I'm going to leave it this week, guys. I know I sort of drag on every week saying about how much I would appreciate you guys sharing these episodes around, and it really has been helping me quite a lot. I've had a lot of messages and been getting a lot of shares from a lot of different people, and been getting a lot of messages from some random people, which is nice to hear people actually listening to this outside of my inner circle, which is really nice. And it's nice to see other people engaging with the podcast on the other end. As I say, I sit here every week and just think who is actually on the other end of this, but it's nice to hear from people and hear that people are actually gaining things from these episodes. So that is really nice, and it's nice to be able to hear from all you guys as well. But I think that's where we're going to leave today's episode, guys, and I will speak to you all again next Monday. Bye.